Okay, let's start with a very short video on the learning pit.
Michael Jordan is a very famous and successful basketball player. In fact, the most successful North American athlete of all time. He holds the NBA record for the highest regular season scoring average and highest playoff scoring average. He came from humble beginnings, and to get where he did, he needed to be focused and to work hard. But to do this, and above all else, he needed to be resilient. To be resilient means to be able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. He once famously said, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." He recognises that failure is a necessary part of success. Without failing, you can't learn, because it's when we're confused, when things go wrong, when we hit a problem and don't know how to fix it, the real, deep and powerful learning begins. To help illustrate this idea, it's useful to think of this as a visual metaphor called the learning pit. First, we're faced with a problem. Given a task or introduced to a new idea, we may feel apprehensive or worried that we may not be able to do it. It's at this point that we have to leap into the pit. The only way to resolve the problem is to move forward, jump in and have a go. Sometimes this can take guts and determination. When we first face obstacles in a task and we find ourselves at a dead end, we're at the bottom of the pit. You may feel that you don't want to speak out in class for fear of getting the answer wrong, or are so confused you don't know how to start. It is at this point that we must move through this sense of fear and begin to try. Once you start applying different approaches or techniques, you begin to learn. You will make mistakes, but once you have, you'll be able to think about what went wrong and how to fix it. This way, you will develop a much deeper understanding of what you're learning. The learning pit is about learning to know what to do when you don't know what to do. When you're finally out of the pit and see what you've achieved, you'll feel an overwhelming sense of achieving the satisfaction. But even more important than this, you will have developed resilience, which will continue to help you long after you've left school. The next time you face a learning problem, go on, jump in.
In learning theory, it's referred to, I don't know if you've heard this before, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is summarised as people who don't really understand things usually don't realise that they don't really understand things. It's sometimes quoted as dumb people don't know they're dumb, which is not a very nice way of saying. The Dunning-Kruger curve looks like this. When you're trying to learn something, you're trying to achieve competence. And when you first encounter it, you have a surge of confidence and you think, oh, I get this. That bit is called the Mount Stupid, basically, because you're still low on competence, but you think you've got it. Okay? And usually something comes along that tips you into the valley of despair, which is the learning pit. Okay? And it's a slow progress, but a positive progress then to work towards real deep understanding of whatever topic it is that you're looking at, until you get to some sort of expertise. Your confidence comes back up because you now feel that you understand it. Now, a lot of people stay here at the first understanding. Okay? What we want to do over the next 13 weeks is let you go down there, but get you up to here. So that come the external exam, you are high on both confidence, that's important, but also you have the competence to really perform to your best on the exam. Okay? It's a process. If you're not feeling confused about things at various points in the next 13 weeks, you are not getting the understanding that you need. Okay? If you can't identify things that you're struggling with sometimes in the next 13 weeks, then you're staying at the superficial level. Another bit of research, I forget the name of this guy who did this, it's about 30 or 40 years old, tested people in terms of teaching them something and then how long they remember it, and this is referred to as the forgetting curve, the red one. Okay? That tomorrow you'll forget, you know, a certain proportion of this, the next day you'll forget more of it, and so on. And this is the benefit of what we call spaced practice, where no matter what the time period is, no matter how much you've forgotten, when you practice it again, you restart the forgetting curve, and each time the gradient of that curve gets less and less. So that's how you go from the valley of despair to the plateau of sustainability, is through spaced practice. In other words, revisiting time and time again. This is one of the main reasons why we have structured the whole course so that you have 13 weeks or 14 weeks of revision. Because what we want to do is get you up there on the red line. Okay. Now, up to year 11, you were only ever doing terms work test, maybe two terms and a semester test or something like that. Now you've got 12 months of work to become competent in. It's a whole different picture and a whole different strategy needs to be applied. Okay, so some tips that are a bit all over the place, but you might want to just jot down a few ideas. I'll put this PowerPoint up, I'll put the best of the 3 videos up, and you can have a look at them again over the weekend if you wish to. Some things from the research. If you want to study seriously, work with paper and pen wherever possible. Okay? It's the sensate nature of us. And one of the things that working with pen and paper does is that it slows us down. It slows us down so that our thinking can, or our processing can match our thinking rate. Okay? Working with pen and paper though has a psychomotor and a sensate dimension that working with a screen doesn't have. So wherever possible, work with pen and paper. Now, some of the research is equivocal on this, but I think the weight of the evidence suggests that you don't use music ever while you're trying to study. Okay? I read a paper just recently, a research thing, not unlike what we did at the end of last year, where we surveyed all of our students, science students, what works, what didn't work, all that sort of stuff, trying to find out what to do again this year and not to do again this year. That a number of our kids and a number of the guys in this research study used noise cancelling headphones. So if they were studying here in an afternoon or in ST or something, use noise cancelling headphones. And I've done it myself on trains and things like that, where I just put my noise cancelling earbuds in and don't play any music, but it drowns out the background. So a lot of guys tell me, you know, music helps me focus and it makes it more enjoyable. Yep, it makes it more enjoyable. So my suggestion is listen to music for 5 minutes and then study for 25 minutes. Don't try and do both at once, you know? It's important that you enjoy what you're doing. So yeah, if you want to listen to some music for a while, do that. But don't confuse it with making you more efficient. It does not. Simply because it takes bandwidth from the same part of the brain you're trying to use to think. Okay? No phones, smartwatches in the room. The paper on that is up on Moodle in the tutorial section. Okay? Even turned off on the table in front of you and face down, turned off, literally turned off as in powered down, they were still shown to take some of your bandwidth. Okay? Put them on charge in the lounge room or something. Don't have them on you. My suggestion would be, and the research says, if you're studying, computers on only if you need it. Okay? So only if you need it to go to Moodle to have something up or something like that. All right. When we go to the second revision phase after the mock 2, where we're just doing paper after paper after paper after paper, I will give them to you on paper. Okay? So that when you're doing them, you don't have to have the computer open. Okay. Don't plan to do 7 hours study at once, right? Chunk it up. I've talked to you before about how to plan study time, and the video and PowerPoint for that is up on the tutorial page on Moodle. Chunk things up with short breaks, but during the break, don't turn your computer on. Okay? Think about how you're working. Examine how you're working. Don't just think, what is the content I've got to get through, in this session on Saturday or whatever. At the end of it, ask yourself, how did I go? What did I do? Think about, how do you make this better? What do I take away from it? The other paper is about distractions, and it's up on Moodle on the tutorial page as well. And this was in an office setting, but also an undergraduate university setting, where they simply had distractions like a message coming through on the phone, or somebody walking past your desk saying hello, or something like that. And they demonstrated that it reduced effectiveness of the work output, your flow, for up to 20 minutes afterwards. Okay? If you can get into flow is where you're continually focused, and you've all had this experience at one time or another where you look up and think, shit, it's an hour already, and time flies. Avoid distractions. That's why, for example, in the afternoon shoots, I sometimes rouse because you're having a chat, okay? And you think that the chat is only 10 seconds, but it has an impact on your effectiveness long after that 10 seconds, okay? You can't multitask, right? Human beings fool themselves into thinking they're multitasking. The research is very clear. Whenever we think we're multitasking, we are actually linear tasking and switching very quickly. So we can focus on one task at a time, but we're good at switching. And switching diminishes the effectiveness of the task. So you're doing something, you switch out to do something else, you come back, you're not as effective, it's not in flow like it was before. Having a schedule and sticking to it reduces stress. That's clear from the research. And that was behind my strategy for planning out your block exam, or your exam block time and so on, that I've given you before. And if you need to refresh on that, the video and PowerPoint's up on Moodle. Okay, what have we learned about dot point summaries and how to use them? Now, I said most of this to you at the start of the first term this year, but spacing out review helps retention, improves long-term memory, performance, and performance on the exam. So you need to revisit regularly throughout the term, well, regularly over the next 13 weeks. Okay? And what will happen over the next 13 weeks is, if you revisit the dot point summaries regularly, that is spaced practice, the forgetting curve, right? If you revisit them regularly, they will take less and less time each time you do it. The first time you go through the dot point summaries for physics, this is physics, isn't it? Yes. Physics, the first time you go through, it's going to take hours. The second time it will take less. The third time it will take less, and so on. Until, by the time the exam comes around, you should be able to run through the dot point summaries almost from memory, and in 90 minutes or so, whole course. Okay? Now, having said that, whenever you go through the dot point summaries, if you identify, and I'm going to show you, you want to interleave them, if you identify a topic that you think, oh, I've dropped that, I'm not remembering that much, then you switch to mass practice and you spend an hour or two just on that topic. You know? It's important when you're reviewing dot points that you always start in different places. Otherwise, you're going to know Unit 1, Topic 3.1 really, really well, and others not so well. All right? And the dip for most people right now will be term 1 of this year, magnetism. For most of you, that will be your worst topic at the moment, from our experience. All right, mixing up the review boost performance, interleave practice always, from this point until the exam, interleave practice rather than mass practice, but mass practice when you identify a lack, when you identify some weakness. Okay? You know what I mean by the difference between those? Problem sets that you should be doing from this point forward would be a mix of all the different topics until you identify, I can't do magnetism, so you need to do a day on magnetism, or 2 days, or 3 days, whatever it is to get you up to date. Yep? Okay. Our key strategy is active recall. It is the single most effective way of trying to get something to stick in your head. Active recall, that is, not just recognising. The worst possible thing you can do is sit and look at your dot point summaries. Okay? You have to try and remember them from memory and then check. That's active recall. So that's the power of flashcards and other techniques like that, right? Flashcards. I didn't do flashcards when I was your age at school or at uni, but I did do summaries sort of down 2 sides of a page, and I would cover the right-hand side and have the topics on the left-hand side, and I would try and give back verbally. This is the stuff on the right-hand side. This is the explanation for it. This is what I need to know. And the key thing with that always is be active. I would suggest if you're really trying to study, don't sit down. Right? It certainly didn't work for me. Walk around, walk away from the list, try and remember, go back to the list, that's okay. All right. In my time, we didn't have whiteboards. I had a chalkboard in my room, and I would say things out verbally because that's much quicker to get repetitions up, and repetitions are what count. But where I wanted to write a formula or something, I'd just scribble it up and keep going. So in your study, be active. All right? The worst thing you can do is just sit there and stare at a book. It's a waste of time. You may as well sleep. Okay? And just on that, I did have students ask me last year about subliminal learning and recording things to play back on headphones while you sleep. No, it doesn't work, right? It's nonsense, urban myth. Okay? When you do active recall, always check. Make sure that you're not confirming in long-term memory something that is in fact wrong. Okay? So you try and give the definition, and then you look at it, and you say, okay, it's right. Cool, move on. Okay. To learn things off, repetition is the key, and I find saying it out loud is the superior method of getting reps in for 2 reasons. One, it's quicker, so you get more repetitions in. Right? But secondly, our brains are wired in such a way that we can't daydream while we speak out loud. While we speak to ourselves in our inner narrative, we can. When we write, we can daydream. But when we're speaking out loud, we don't have the opportunity to, we can get distracted, but we don't have the opportunity to create extended thoughts that aren't about what we're saying. Okay? It's just the way the brain works. As much as possible, use more senses than one. Okay? And that's another benefit of speaking it out. You're using hearing as well as seeing. When you do sketch something or write it or draw it or whatever, you're also using touch, and the more senses you can involve in the learning process, the more parts of the brain you're engaging, the more memory you're actually writing at the time. So, I'm going to give you some strategies I want you to try and use in the first mock in a few weeks' time. I'll go through them very quickly today. We'll spend another period on them, or half a period, just before the mock to remind you of what I want you to do. Okay? But these are specific exam techniques that I want you to use in our 50% exam. All right? Or at least I want you to try in the 2 mocks and see how they work for you. Okay? Weigh all of this up against what works for you, but don't use that as an excuse. Don't walk out of here saying, yeah, I know he said I shouldn't play music, and the research says I shouldn't play music, but I prefer to study with music, okay? If you do that, you're making a deliberate decision to go against the science, and we are studying science here. So that's a bit crazy, all right? All right, just some general advice. This is the information from the syllabus. And I've just dropped the word science in where physics or chemistry would be, so that I can use this slide in both classes. Right? The summative external assessment is developed and marked by the QCAA. In physics, it contributes 50% to your result. Assesses learning from both units 3 and 4. The external assessment is common to all schools and administered under the same conditions on the same time at the same day. It assesses a range of the application of a range of cognitions to multiple provided items, questions, scenarios and problems. Student responses must be completed individually, if you didn't realise that, under supervised conditions and in a set time frame. Now, I've just taken out the topics here. The 5 assessment objectives are describe and explain, apply understanding, analyse evidence to identify trends, patterns, relationships, limitations or uncertainty, and interpret evidence to draw conclusions based on analysis. Now, one mistake some guys made last year was focusing only on the top 2 objectives, 1 and 2. And they were then a little bit thrown by the fact that they had to do analysis of graphs that was more like a student experiment. Okay? But it's there in the specification for the exam. Now, yes, by far, the majority of the exam is describe and explain or apply understanding. Yes. But you will encounter in both subjects, in all the sciences, questions which ask you to analyse evidence and identify trends, patterns, relationships, and to draw conclusions and interpret evidence. Okay? If you look at last year's physics exam, the second paper was what threw some guys. It was just a lot of photoelectric effect graphs and magnetism graphs, and you had to interpret and use the data. Okay? Some of them walked out and said this was more like a data test. Well, what they meant was this is more like a data test than what they felt they had prepared for. Okay? Incidentally, if you haven't yet gone through it, last year's real paper is up on Moodle with the marking guide there as well. There are still some spare paper copies over there if you want one. Okay. The exam consists of 2 papers, and the mocks do. Each paper consists of a number of different types of possible items. Paper 1, 90 minutes plus 10 minutes perusal. You're allowed a graphics calculator and your formula and data booklet, okay, which will be the same as the one you have, same as the ones down the back. Paper 2, 90 minutes plus 10 minutes perusal, same deal. Approved equipment for all assessments. This is what you may have with you. Black or blue pens, 2B pencil, sharpener and eraser. The 2B pencil is only required for multiple choice questions and drawing graphs or diagrams. Black or blue pen must be used for all other written responses. Now, first mock, second mock, I'm going to mark it like the QCAA does. So you answer the multiple choice in the multiple choice booklet instead of on the answer sheet, you get 0. You put a stray mark somewhere on the multiple choice answer sheet, you get 0 for the questions around it. Okay? You put a mark there to say, I need to come back to this, and you forget to rub it out, you get 0 for that question. Okay? They're read by computer. Any marks will be read as 2 answers, and therefore given 0. Okay? You write with pencil in an answer, I'll give you 0. You write outside the box, I won't mark it. Okay? You can't write outside the box because the papers are scanned. The marker only sees the box. A highlighter, you may have a highlighter, a clear plastic ruler, water in a clear unlabelled bottle, and an asthma inhaler. The asthma inhaler is not compulsory. You do not have to have an asthma inhaler unless you need an asthma inhaler. Okay? You may use a clear plastic container or Ziploc bag to carry your equipment if needed. Prohibited materials. Okay. You may not have any electronic device, basically, other than the calculator. Correction fluid or correction tape, dictionaries, erasable pens are outlawed. Blank paper notes, any written material or tissues. Okay? So you may only take in what you're allowed to take in. Now, before the exam block, if you plan to use a graphics calculator, and I suggest you do because that's the one you're familiar with, just be clear that it could be cleared at the beginning of the exam. Okay? Last year we found that they were cleared but not put in exam mode. Your calculators can be put in exam mode, which restricts a whole lot of functions. Last year's guys weren't put in exam mode. We're assuming the same thing would happen. But my advice to you is, don't rely on the calculator for anything other than calculations. Okay? The instruction is it will be cleared of memory. And if you look up, you can see what button sequence and so on you can use to clear of memory. And you will probably be required to do that at the start of the real exam. The second thing that you can do in advance, one other thing that you can do in advance, is become really familiar with the content and layout of the formula and data book. So whenever you do questions, have the formula and data book in front of you and get to know exactly where everything is. Okay? So you're not wasting a second in the exam working out where something is. You need to make a plan. All right? Now I've put up the calendar on the tutorial page from here until the external exams. If you want to grab that Excel file and just delete all the stuff in each week and make your own plan, that would be a good idea. Or if you wanted to, simply add another row under each week and make your own plan and plan for the weekends. That would be a good idea. The calendar's there. Right? Adapt it to your use. If you want to see how I've suggested planning out exam blocks, it's on Moodle there. And the research is pretty clear. You have to physically look after yourself for the next 13 weeks. Right? Be gentle with yourself, look after yourself, eat well, get plenty of sleep, get plenty of exercise. I didn't put that in there because it doesn't come naturally to me, but eat well, get plenty of sleep. The sleep thing is not just about being well rested. The sleep thing is critical to learning in both psychomotor and cognitive processing terms. I'm sure you've all had the experience where you struggled with something, a physical skill or a cognitive skill one day, and suddenly find the next day you can do it better. Okay? That's because REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is part of the process of laying down memories from the day. Therefore, good REM sleep is a key part of actually learning something. Don't say that to me when you next fall asleep in class. Okay? Okay, now I'll run through these again before you go on that block. But in the exam, in perusal time, you can't write or use a calculator. So what do you do in 10 minutes? Well, very first thing you do is check through the entire paper quickly to see what's on it. Get a feel for the paper. That does one main thing for you. All right? Now, you may not have experienced this in the past, but you will be most prepared that you've ever been for an exam for this one. Just flicking through the paper will reduce your stress level. Because once you have seen the questions, you know that some of them are okay and you're going to be able to do them at least. Okay? In previous exams, flicking through the paper, you might feel, has increased your stress levels. But you have never gone into an exam as prepared as you will be in November this year for this exam. So a quick flick through does two things. It reduces your stress level and it helps to avoid people who walk out of an exam not seeing the last page or something like that. All right? Secondly, during perusal, you need to work out a rough timing for the exam. It's 90 minutes that you have. The QCAA will not release beforehand how many marks are on the paper. So in perusal is the first time you see whether it's 25 marks, 30 marks, 47 marks or whatever. And just do a quick mental calculation and say, all right, well that means it's 2 minutes a mark. So this question is 5 minutes. I need to be prepared to spend 5 marks. I need to be prepared to spend 10 minutes on it. Now don't do it. Don't spend all the perusal calculating in your head every question and what it's worth in time. Just get an idea. You know, those 3 questions, they're going to take about half an hour. These questions, that's going to be about 20 minutes. Just get an idea of what sort of time you should spend. And in particular, the first paper, how much time should you spend on the multiple choice versus the short answer? Because you will tend to scrimp on the short answer time. Oh, sorry, on the multiple choice time. You'll tend to try and race through those too quickly. But if they're 20 marks out of 45, then they deserve the time that 20 marks out of 45 is worth. Okay? In perusal, you should also make a rough plan of attack. You don't have to do the questions in order, but you should have an order to the questions that you do. In other words, choose, am I going to do this one first because I find it hard, or am I going to do these 3 first because I find them easy and I think I'll get some time up my sleeve? All right? Now, of the paper, you might decide to do a third of it in the order it's presented. They don't matter to you, those questions. They're neither here nor there. But this question might be really hard and you want to get it out of the way first up, or it might be really easy and you want to get it out of the way first up. Make a bit of a plan. Okay? And finally, start. Don't sit there waiting for perusal to finish. If there's multiple choice questions, there will be definition multiple choice questions that you can start. And you can use your fingernail, not on the answer sheet, but on the question sheet to mark. Don't make it deliberate, don't make it obvious, don't do this so that the invigilators and monitors from the QCAA start to wonder what the hell's going on. But you can answer questions. And then your aim is, when they say you may start writing now, you should have 3 or 4 marks up your sleeve. Okay, now, I forgot that the next few slides go through these 4 points. So, let's just see look at what the questions are like, look for ones that are easy and hard, make sure you have the formula and data book and you can find things in it. So that's the brief scan. Work out your timing. Yep, I've said all that. In 90 minutes, I'd work on 3 30-minute blocks because you can keep an eye on that on the clock. Now here they tend to use digital clocks. I would prefer to use an analog clock so that I could see, okay, well I've got till 1:30 and then I've got till 12 and so on. But I'd just work in 15-minute blocks or 30-minute blocks. And say, I've got to have this done by then, I've got to have this done by then. Okay. Make a plan of attack. I've been through all of that. Start some questions. If it's the short answer paper, then you can plan out some of your response, a response for one, and as soon as you're allowed to write, you can answer it. Okay? You can't touch your calculator, you can't make notes, but if it was an explain the twin paradox question or something like that, then you could have that formulated in your head by the time they tell you you can write. And it's just a matter of getting it down on paper. What you're aiming to do is to turn a 90-minute paper into a 95-minute paper and make fools of all those people across the state who are sitting there, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the exam to start. Okay. Multiple choice. You need to choose the best answer. That's how they get around the fact that some of the questions might be wrong. Okay? You need to choose the best answer for questions 1 to 20 or 1 to 30 or whatever it is. The number of multiple choice is not set. Okay? It'll tell you on the day. Use a 2B pencil to fill in A, B, C or D and answer the bubble, and it shows you how to do that. If you change your mind and make a mistake, use an eraser to remove your response and fill in the new answer bubble completely. You need to use a 2B pencil because that erases sufficiently for the scanner to not read it as a second response. It's soft enough. Most questions will have some stimulus material. Read such material closely and actively. Okay? After this first mock, I should not be able to reuse your question books. They should be written all over. My strategy, if I was doing this exam, some people will tell you to highlight things in the question. I don't believe that because you've got to put down your pencil, pick up your highlighter. Right? I use 2 shortcuts. I circle what I have to do and I underline what's important to know. Okay? So you're looking at the cognitive verbs for what you need to do and you're looking at the data for what you need to know. If you make that a habit, now I've mixed it up here, this is not a good example, but if you make it a habit between now and then, it will become automatic to you. If you say, yeah, I'll do that, but I'll use it in the real exam only, you'll forget. Okay? So, what would I do with this one? Okay, this is important information. I'd go to the axis. This is important information. Oops, sorry. Let's go back. So I would say, all right, this represents that's the cognitive verb, and the gradient is what it represents. So I just do that, and I do it with the pencil. I do it with the pencil so that I don't have to change pens or anything. All right, and immediately I'd cross out the ones that are obviously wrong, so that reduces or increases my chances to 50% if I've got a guess. And then I look at it and say, okay, the gradient of this, I know that's Planck's constant. And I mark the circle. Please don't do all your answers in there and not mark the circles. All right? Don't go back to mark the circles later. If you go back to mark the circles later, there's the possibility you won't remember to go back to mark the circles. There's also a possibility that when you're transferring across, you're more likely to make an error than when you're thinking about it's A, therefore you mark A. Okay? Now, what is your answer sheet doing at this point? It is sitting there under your ruler. And your ruler is sitting on question 5 at the moment. So you mark it and then move it down, and then you come back and you look at question 6, and so on. Do the multiple choice in the order they're given. Don't start mucking that around. Okay? All right. Short answer, black or blue pen. Respond in paragraphs consisting of full sentences is not in your instructions. Yep. I believe so. We've had this discussion, and I believe so. All right? Unless it says, write in full sentences. Okay? You need to make sure you use the extra space. If you need more response, in fact, I don't think the paper says that, if you need more space for a response, but if you need to make an additional response, a replacement response, then you've got pages at the back. If it was a diagram that you had to fill in, there'd be another copy of the diagram. but it is critically important that you cancel any incorrect response by ruling a single diagonal line through the work and write see page 27 or whatever it is. Okay? If you don't do that, then the marker will simply see your first thing. Even if you've just crossed it out completely, the marker will still see your first thing. A diagonal line, a single diagonal line, and see page such and such. Okay. Once again, actively work the paper. You can write all over the paper, but don't scribble in the response space. The response space is for your response. Okay? And once again, I would circle the cognitive verbs and underline anything in particular. What there is in the short answer that there isn't in the multiple choice is cues. I'll show you one. So here's an example. Circle the cognitive verb, calculate, which means, what do you need to do? You need to show you're working, right? It won't always say show you're working, but if it says calculate, you need to show you're working. If it says determine, you don't need to show you're working. Calculate the vertical component of the projectile's initial velocity. So you've got the cognitive verb, you need to look at the marks allocated. The response space itself tells you what the response is supposed to look like. And the answer box usually includes a cue. So there's a couple of cues here to what's going to be important in terms of marking. It's not a hard and fast rule, but if it's worth 3 marks, they're looking for 3 things. Remember that there's no part marks, there's no half marks. So you either get 1, 2, 3 or 0 for this question. Okay? And they're looking for 3 things, and they're looking for 3 things to be unambiguously present. The marking scheme will say the formula, the numbers substituted into the formula, a correct answer rearranged, or something like that. Okay? It may penalise you if you give the answer to 2 decimal places when the cue says 1 decimal place. So one of the things I'm going to get you to check at the end of the exam when you've got some time, and hopefully you will have time like last year's guys did, one of the checks I want you to make is ignore the question and just go through the entire booklet looking at this and seeing, have I done that? Right? It'll take you 90 seconds, but it'll be worth it. Okay, at the end, checking. What do I want you to do? When you're planning out the time, try and plan some checking time. And last year, the guys in both chemistry and physics didn't find a time pressure. They did have time at the end to check. Okay. We can't guarantee that that'll be the case this time. We can't guarantee anything, but we hope it will be. When you're checking, I'd do these checks. I would go back first to the questions you found easiest and make sure you haven't been an idiot, done something stupid. Okay? The questions you found easiest are the marks you should automatically have in the bank. You don't want to make an error on those. So I would go back to those and make sure you got there. I wouldn't go to the hardest ones first. Right? If you found them hard 10 minutes ago, you're going to find them hard now. If you couldn't do it 10 minutes ago, you probably can't do it now. So if I've got 10 minutes to spend checking, I'd go first to the easy ones and make sure I haven't stuffed them up. All right? I'd check all the calculations, not just look at them, but I'd recalculate all of the calculations through the paper. I'd type them in again in case I typed them in wrong last time. And then I'd go to the questions that I didn't really get the first time. Because, to be honest, if you didn't get them 10 minutes ago, you might snag it now, that's true, you might snag it, and it's worth looking at, but it's not worth giving up your easy questions for the sake of those hard questions. Okay? On the multiple choice, the very last check you need to make is go down with the ruler and simply make sure you've only got one answer, and you've got one to each question. Okay? And then, just because I have a lot more confidence in the QCAA than they seem to indicate is warranted, I would look at patterns. any more than 3 of one letter in a row should be dodgy. Any where you get A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A should be dodgy. There should be one dodgy one in there. Right? If you've got 4 C's in a row, it's quite possible one of those C's could be wrong. So if you've got time and you go to check, I'd check those 4 first and just see. Are they all really C? Doesn't mean they have to be. Okay? The QCAA is not great at randomising things. It should be, but it's not great. So if you do get a pattern, it's not automatically wrong, it's just that's a place you could start to check if you've got time. Okay. In the short answer, one of the checks I'd do is go back to the cognitive verb, the cue, and the answer box. Don't do the question, just look, have I done what it said? Have I done what it said? Have I done what it said? On each of the questions. If there's a question on there that you have no idea about, don't spend a lot of time on it. It's a false economy. Spend your time on questions you can make sure you get 100% on. Later, before the second mock, we'll deliberately go through questions. Oh, what do you do when you look at a question and you think, is this even in the course? Because I've never seen this stuff before. What do you do when you get that question? Because it's quite possible. Okay. After the exam, we're going to be giving you feedback, throwing it down your throat, in fact. You need to make sure you use it, but we'll talk about that more then. Now, on Moodle. We're not chemistry, we're physics. On Moodle, I have opened up the revision section, but before you get to that, there's revision material. Okay? There's the Unit 3 revision from Year 11. That was at the start of the year. That was the January revision that we planned to do by tutorial in here, but had to be cancelled for COVID, so I did a whole lot of mini video lessons and did the work solutions for the questions and so on in there. Okay? That's all on Unit 3 stuff that we'd covered in Year 11 only. So that's up to the end of electrostatics. So about the middle of the top row. Okay? Then we have underneath that quizzes on the revision from Year 11, a couple of quizzes and the answers. Then we did a tute in April in the Easter holidays. That's up there. And the Unit 3 revision, when we finished Unit 3, the revision questions that I gave you, all the work solutions are up there. Now, in the external exam revision section, you've got the whole program of study. You've got the QCAA exam from last year and its marking guide, and the sample paper and its marking guide. You've got the dot point, the shuffling dot point presentation that I used in the tutorial over the June-July holidays. That you can shuffle the dot points and test yourself on. There's a couple of dot point files there that separate. These are all the no ones, these are all the do ones, if you need to. The Unit 3 revision tutorial and solutions is there. And now this is new. I've just opened up the Nelson chapter tests. They're multiple choice quizzes over the whole course. And they also have a couple of Unit 3-4 exams that we'll look at in class from here on in. Okay? So that's what I want you to do, how I want you to focus between now and the first mock.